The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, dedicated to creating access to financial well-being for local people, businesses, and communities. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, live music Thursday with music from Ablai Sissoko. I'm going to get this before the end of the show. And Cyril Broto before their sold-out Bombix show tonight.
And we'll hear from a pioneering historian who'll give talks on two of the 5 college campuses over the next 2 days, Dr. Deborah Gray-White.
You got to say Gray-White. But first, as always, we check the temperature on Capitol Hill.
Because things are definitely heating up there.
Hey, how are you?
Couldn't you? Were you at the prayer breakfast?
No, I skipped it. I pray enough.
A lot of those people need a lot of prayer.
They need an exorcist.
Time for our weekly check-in with U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Congressman Jim McGovern, in a segment that I like to call McGoverning with McGovern. Headline from the Daily Hampshire Gazette from a couple days ago: McGovern rips DHS funding, presses GOP on Trump's Epstein ties. We'll talk about the Epstein stuff a little bit later, but let's talk about what's going on with the Department of Homeland Security. It looks like there was a Senate-passed bill on Tuesday that ended the brief partial shutdown, but now there's a February 13th deadline to reach a bipartisan agreement on a lot of these changes. Many of these changes have to do with the behavior of ICE, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that a number of Democrats haven't ruled out another short-term funding punt for the Department of Homeland Security. I know that leadership in the Democratic Party seemed to have sent a wish list of DHS policy changes to Mike Johnson and John Thune, the leaders of the Republicans, but that it seems like they don't have much interest in those ideas. How does it stand with the funding of DHS and the government shutdown threat?
Well, virtually everything is funded. I mean, DHS is the one appropriation bill that has been funded through next week, and then, it may be funded week by week by week, and it's unclear what the future is. But here's the deal. I mean, ICE is out of control. We've seen what's happened in Minnesota. You see what's happening all over the country. You have U.S. citizens being killed. You have U.S. citizens being detained by ICE and treated as if they're somehow criminals, off-duty police officers, 5-year-old kids, people going into the supermarket. And it's creating fear, and it's creating a lot of unrest throughout the country. You have these masked agents that don't have to identify themselves. This is crazy. Look, I personally believe that ICE ought to be abolished. I've said that over, and I've been saying that for years. Now they are totally out of control under Donald Trump. They're scaring the hell out of everybody, and this has to be stopped. So Democratic leaders have a wish list of things that they want changed and adjusted within ICE. Obviously, I agree with all of those changes, but I think we need to do more. We lived for over 200 years without ICE. We ought to start from scratch and figure out a better way to do this.
The Wall Street Journal is seeming to say that sanctuary cities are at the heart of this debate from the Republicans' perspective, and they want to crack down on sanctuary cities. Is that what you're hearing?
Well, I'm not hearing that the Republicans are willing to do anything to adjust ICE the way it is right now for anything. But they do focus on sanctuary cities all the time. And quite frankly, it's not the federal government's business whether or not a community wants to declare themselves a sanctuary town or sanctuary city. The bottom line is people are doing that because they don't want ICE invading their communities. They don't want people to live in fear. My sister's a school teacher in Worcester, and she tells me that there are some parents that are afraid to, bring their kids to school and pick them up. And these are people who are U.S. citizens, but they look like they might be an immigrant. Mm-hmm. What they're afraid of is being detained for a period of time, where they won't be able to pick their kid up from school. People in this country shouldn't have to live like that. Now Republicans are talking about putting more hurdles in place when you come to vote, kind of a new Jim Crow approach to voting. We don't have a problem with fraud in our elections by and large. We just don't. And that's a good thing. We have some good checks and balances in place already, but throwing more hurdles and hurdles and hurdles, for people to have to jump over just to be able to vote makes no sense to me. But they're exploiting this immigration issue to get other things that they want, because I think they're afraid that come November, they're going to lose and lose big. What they're trying to do is figure out how do we create an atmosphere where fewer people vote. That's their only chance of prevailing.
And people within Trump's circle, like Steve Bannon, advocating that ICE might be used at the polls to avert some sort of voting fraud, which, as Congressman McGovern mentioned here, there is little to no evidence that this type of widespread fraud even exists. Also worth noting that your hometown, Worcester, which you referenced, and according to Adam Bass in Mass Live, Worcester will not let Immigration and Custom Enforcement use municipal properties to stage immigration operations. That was just announced yesterday by the city manager there, Eric Batista. But back to the elections, what about the notion that has been put out there by the Trump White House, even though it's getting some pushback from some high-level Republicans like Lindsey Graham, that the Republicans would nationalize the elections? This is the great fear, that there would no longer be municipal control of elections, no longer state control of elections, and that the federal government would take it over. Lindsey Graham even said it could be fatal to conservatism if liberals run the federal government and basically institute California policy. He says, I like President Trump. I like to make elections better, but once you go down that road, they can go down that road too. Is this a realistic threat that the elections, even perhaps the elections this November, would be nationalized?
I don't know, but when the President of the United States says it, and especially this President of the United States, I think you have to take him seriously. Donald Trump doesn't care about what happens after the election. I mean, I think in his mind, he'd be perfectly fine if there were no more elections. He's just trying to get through this election in a way where he maintains total control of everything. The Congress has become just a rubber stamp for everything he does. I mean, there are no profiles in coverage right now in the House or the Senate on the Republican side in terms of standing up to Trump. So, I mean, he's just trying to figure out, how do I get through November in a way where I can continue to accumulate power? This is a guy who, when he says these kind of off-the-wall things, you have to take it seriously because he says what's on his mind.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, what's your take on the Supreme Court decision yesterday on allowing the new maps in California, the gerrymandered maps, to continue in light of what's gone on in other states for the Republican Party? The Democratic governor of California, Gavin Newsom, said Donald Trump said he was entitled to 5 more congressional seats in Texas. He started this redistricting war. He lost, and he'll lose again in November. Is this the way that the country should be going forward? Is this a victory? Is it a bittersweet victory?
Well, it's a bittersweet victory in the sense that, this is not the way we should be doing redistricting, and this is not the way our elections should be pursued. But again, Trump did this in Texas, and the question for Gavin Newsom and others was, you just say, okay, this is wrong, you did it, and therefore you win again, even though you shouldn't win again. He's evening the playing field, and I don't like what happened in Texas. I'm not nuts about what happened in California, but Trump decided to go down this road. I think we need to, when Trump is gone, we need to have a more thoughtful conversation about how we approach our elections. It can't be that we rig them. Again, that's not democracy. That's not what this country is supposed to be about.
Now to the huge elephant in the party that's represented by an elephant, but also the donkeys as well, the Epstein files. There has been a new tranche of documents that has been released. I admit that I have been trying to only read the periphery of this, but I went down the Epstein file rabbit hole this week and doom scrolling about all of these horrific and terrible and disturbing stories. All of the QAnon conspiracy theory and Pizzagate and adrenochrome and all these things that you've been hearing that seemed like the fringe of society for a decade, now maybe in these millions of pages of the Epstein files. You posted, this administration is collapsing under the weight of its ties to a global child rape ring. Trump's name alone appears 5,361 times in Epstein documents we've seen so far. Why won't he cooperate? There are millions of files yet to be released. Noam Chomsky, a huge name in the left, is implicated in this. So many people have been implicated in this. Now, the Clintons, who are also in this, look like they're prepared to testify. It looks like later in this month, they will testify in at least closed-door interviews with the House Oversight Committee. It also seems like the younger generation in Congress, that the Clinton name maybe doesn't loom as large, like Representative Maxwell Frost, who's 28 years old, is recommending that the Clintons be held in contempt. A lot of people are being bombarded with this information. The information is so disturbing, but if it is even close to true what's in here about the accusations against Trump, what are we as the American public to do with this information?
Well, a couple things. One is that the Clintons have cooperated, and they balked at being called before the committee because James Comer, who's the chair, basically made it very clear that he's trying to deflect blame from Trump and put it on somebody else. But they are coming. They're coming, and they're going to be subjected to questioning by the committee. That's something, by the way, that Donald Trump is not subjected to. And not only is he not subjected to that, nobody in his cabinet who is being named in these files has been subjected to that. We have a little bit of a double standard here. But I'm glad the Clintons are coming forward. Clear the air. It's important. But everybody should do that. It shouldn't just be them. And in fact, I don't think Trump thought they would say yes, because yesterday he was like, I feel bad for them. I don't think that, I don't know why they have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly Trump is covering up on something. I think what bothers me about the release of the files is, again, they're being released late. This has gone way beyond the time limit that Congress originally imposed on them. And they're exposing more information about the names and identities of the victims and the survivors, much to the shock of the victims and survivors, than they are about the perpetrators, and more details which are in these files about some of the things that they were involved with. That's a problem. We only have about half of them released. There's still another half that has not been released, and we'll have to see what's in them. But it is astounding to me that, based on the information that has been released so far, that only Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell have been held accountable. And Ghislaine Maxwell, by the way, may be released. I mean, she's now in a country club prison. What is the responsibility of everybody else?
Well, who's going to hold them accountable? I mean, like, these accusations, I served on a grand jury one time. If there's any there, charges are brought.
Right.
There is so much there in these files, if they are to be believed. Who would hold the president and everyone associated with this, even the Clintons if they were culpable, to account? Who's going to do it?
The Justice Department is the agency that should do it. We're under no illusion that they will. But that doesn't mean a future Justice Department won't. And that doesn't mean that there can't be legal suits filed in various courts depending on the circumstances. But it's so disgusting, and it really is so shocking, and it is also so sad that so many people were victimized by this out-of-control guy who had a lot of money and access to some of the world's most influential and powerful people. We can't just release all this and say, oh, this is all awful and these are all terrible crimes, and that's all we can do is say they're terrible crimes. I think that there has to be more justice. And again, we'll see what happens in the next elections, whether we have a Congress that actually wants to pursue this in a more meaningful and significant way. But my Republican friends, James Comer, who's the chairman of the committee that's looking into this, is talking about how terrible all this stuff is. I will remind you that the only reason why we're getting these files released was not because the Republicans wanted to. I mean, we offered 9 different amendments in the Rules Committee. 9 different times in the Rules Committee they voted down releasing the files. It was because we launched a discharge petition in the House and got 218 members of Congress, including a couple of Republicans, to sign on to it with us, that forced a vote. And then everybody voted yes, because how do you defend voting no on releasing the files? But these people, are doing Trump's dirty work. Trump wants this to go away. It's not going away. And every day we learn about new lies and new scandals. And again, I think so many people were victimized that there has to be justice in this case. And it would be a stain on our human rights record, quite frankly, if all we were to do is have this stuff released and that was it. I would like to know, since this has been sitting around for all these years, why weren't some of these things pursued? Who made the decision that there's no there, or that this was not worth investigating more or holding somebody accountable? We need to get the information out, and then we need to pressure the powers that be to do their job and to make sure that there's some justice here.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, McGoverning with McGovern, more deep statecraft. The Wall Street Journal saying there's a whistleblower complaint against former Democrat Tulsi Gabbard, who's the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, that is so sensitive that it is, quote, said to be locked in a safe. Are you hearing any information about this and about how Congress can be informed? I
am hearing that. I'm hoping that the Intelligence Committee here in Congress is demanding some information on that. They have an obligation to inform the intelligence committees in the House and Senate of that if they're asked to. It's not only been reported by the Wall Street Journal. Other major news organizations have confirmed that there is something there. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't sound good, which begs the question, what was Tulsi Gabbard doing in Georgia, trying to get voting files? What business is it of hers to be there with the FBI? Because she's supposed to be dealing with international matters, not local matters. So none of this smells right.
Let's end with something a little bit lighter. The Super Bowl is this Sunday. You planning on watching the Super Bowl?
I am, yeah.
Where are you going to watch it?
I'm going to probably watch it in Washington. I'm trying to get on an earlier flight on Sunday to come back. We have votes on Monday, but I don't want to miss it. I hopefully I'll be watching it here. If not, I'll be watching it on my phone at the airport.
Are you going to watch the Bad Bunny halftime show or the Turning Point halftime show with Kid Rock?
I'm going to watch the Bad Bunny halftime show. I think everybody is.
Not everybody, I guess.
I
There's
hope.
a select few that I think are going to watch the Kid Rock one.
Yeah.
Now, this is a personal question for me, too. I'm a lifelong Patriots fan. I grew up 15 minutes from the stadium. Does it bother you that Robert Kraft is a major donor to Trump's campaign and watched the Melania movie with them last week, perhaps the only American to do so? Does that make you have conflicted interests in who you want to see win on Sunday?
It doesn't. I feel bad for Bob Kraft that's how he wants to spend his time. But the Patriots are more than about Bob Kraft, and I'm hoping for the best.
Well, I'm going to take the I can still root for the Patriots from you as a blessing of sorts, that I can put aside politics
absolutely.
for the 3 hours and root for the home team. What's giving you hope this week, Congressman?
You know what? Our district attorneys, including Dave Sullivan, were down in the Capitol this week. I met with him yesterday, and we had a really good conversation. Even when it came to ICE about the importance of our local law enforcement holding these federal officials accountable when they break the law. That was a really good conversation. So that gave me some hope. I'm going to praise our district attorneys this week.
U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts joins us every Thursday. If you got a question for the congressman, you can send it our way, thefab413@nepm.org, and I'll ask him for you. I kind of want to say we all we got to see what you will say. Do you know that phrase from the Patriots?
Oh yeah, yes, I said it yesterday. No, I can't. I
say we all we got, and you say we all we need.
We all we need.
There we go.
But we're recording this like it's
early.
Like it's 35. Yeah, my brain isn't working.
We'll get there.
So we all we got, we all we need. So anyway. And we can compare notes on Bad Bunny next week.
Yes,
okay?
I can't wait. That's why I was excited about the Super Bowl before the Patriots were even in it because of Bad Bunny. I love Bad Bunny. Okay.
And I'm really impressed that, with all the pressure to, push back on Bad Bunny, that Bad Bunny is still performing. So
I love it.
That's a good thing.
Well, thanks as always, Congressman. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Any opportunity, eh?
I love Bad Bunny.
Fair enough. Soon we'll hear the Senegalese and French combination of accordion and kora with Ablaye Sissoko and Cyril Broto, who will perform a sold-out performance in Florence at Bombyx Center for Arts and Equity this evening.
But first, to delve into the annals of history and get some lessons about preserving our own with Dr. Deborah Gray White.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Dean's Beans Organic Coffee, a locally based, worker-owned company committed to social and environmental responsibility, roasting fair trade, organic, shade-grown coffee since 1993. DeansBeans.com.
We're in an undisclosed hotel, let's just say.
Will they get all the other noise?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it's okay. It just means that it proves to people that we are actually in a real place with you.
Because we were excited to meet you, and we're here to talk about history versus memory, the case of Lily Thomas Hines and Eddie Florence Gray, which is a conversation that will happen at Mount Holyoke College this evening, February 5th, from 5:30 to 8, and we are with Dr. Deborah Gray White, who is the person who will be hosting this conversation.
And a pioneer in African American history and how it gets recorded and told to everybody else in the country, really.
Which will be part of the roundtable discussion that you'll be doing at another university, UMass, tomorrow evening at the W.E.B. Du Bois Library with the Afro-Am department there. But thank you so much for meeting us.
Thank you for having me.
Yesterday, there was another talk at Mount Holyoke about working with archives. What were some of the students' questions about digging into those materials that they may have on hand, and what's changed about working with archives now as opposed to when you started your journey in historic academia?
I started working in the archives a long, long time ago. And when I was working in the archives, first of all, you didn't have cameras. You actually had to take notes with a pencil and a yellow pad. One of the things that the students wanted to know is, basically what was my experience. And my experience was that I went into the archives looking for enslaved women because I wanted to contribute at that time to the new literature coming out on slavery in the United States. And turns out I could not find black women anywhere in the archives. I could see that black women were there, but they were nowhere. They're there because they're in somebody's list about what plantation they were enslaved on and who were their owners. But as far as finding out anything that I really wanted to know, like what was it like, what was your experience like, that wasn't there. Part of dealing with the archives is going in expecting to find something, opening box after box and folder after folder and hoping that, you can enlighten yourself as to the subject that you're dealing with. And my experience was that black women were absent. And that's something that has occupied my academic self for a very long time now.
What year was that you began this endeavor to try to uncover these things in the archives?
Oh, it was around 1973.
So you have been doing it for a little bit.
Just a little bit.
But one of the things that I think I hear you talk in your talks mention is that the things that haven't necessarily changed about that work and your search for that intersectionality of like where black women specifically are in history, what other people perceive as there is often inflated. Why do you think that people think that either what you find or don't find is made up or is more than what should be there?
I'm not quite sure exactly how to answer that, but I think that what people believe, particularly when they pick up a book, is that you just actually went to the archives and opened it and found all of this information. And yet you have to know so much about what is going on and what the context of the subject that you're dealing with. And essentially what you're doing is putting little pieces together, little inklings. You find a little piece here and a little piece there. And then somehow you've got to make a story out of it, because that's what I believe. History is basically a lot of stories. The thing that I have preoccupied my career with is the fact that black women having been prevented from writing and from reading and from creating the kind of documents that historians find legitimate. Those kinds of sources are just not there. So the kinds of sources that you're looking at and you're dealing with are scraps of things and pieces, small, tiny pieces of information that somehow you've got to link together and create a story about.
The title of your talk at Mount Holyoke this evening, History versus Memory, the Case of Lily Thomas Hines and Eddie Florence Gray, Dr. Deborah Gray White. Any relation to Florence Gray?
That's my mother. And Lily Thomas is my grandmother.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about what this talk in particular will be about. And I'm assuming because of the family relation,
right,
the memory versus the history that you were just talking about, having to piece together from actual documents a story, sometimes those things are a little bit different.
And here we are. There are a lot of people who are in the historical profession, a lot of historians who discount, shall we say, the value of memory when it comes to history. And it is true that lots of times we remember things the way we want to remember them. But I think that when you combine being a historian with genealogy, and with memory. That when you put the stories together, and in this case it's the story of my grandmother and my mother, that you can actually come up with a history. And in that way, we can create an archive for two black women in particular who didn't really leave the kind of documents that most historians would accept as legitimate history. So I start with my grandmother, Lily Thomas Hines, who was born around 1897 and who was married at 1913 and having given birth to my mother at 1918. Now, we have some sources, we have some documents. We don't have a marriage certificate. I found out the date of their marriage. Actually, it is in the census. But at the same time, I found out the date of their marriage from the family Bible. As far as black families, Christian families, a lot of history that doesn't make its way into the census and to government documents will be in the Bible. My mother was born in 1918, and by the time my mother was born, her mother, Lily Thomas, had two children. Even when I was growing up, I'm like, you had older siblings. But my mother, as I knew her, was the oldest child. So I wanted to know what happened to these older children. It turns out that her oldest sister, whose name was Allie Mae, was burned up in a fire. Now, there is a death certificate on file in South Carolina, and it says on the death certificate that Allie Mae was accidentally burned to death. That's a document that most historians would say, yeah, that happened because we can see it, they wrote it down. But what we don't know is how that fire affected people in the household, how losing a child who was about 2 years old, what did it mean to find your child burnt up? I didn't know that, but I did know that throughout my childhood, my mother told me that her oldest sister was burned in a fire. And I heard this story about her being burned in the fire as if my mother was there. But my mother was only about 2 years old when that fire occurred. But it affected everybody in the household because, my mother was deathly afraid of fire. She grew up in South Carolina when there was no electricity, so that basically she grew up with oil lamps. But even when my mother moved to New York and we had a gas stove, etc., my mother was so deathly afraid of fire. But here is a story about a fire, and we have a document, but we don't have any feeling. We don't know how that impacted my mother's upbringing. Both my mother was illiterate. Both my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, were illiterate. Again, I didn't know that until I actually did see some documents. I saw a real estate statement, and I saw my grandfather's card, his World War I registration card. Okay, what did that mean? Did that mean, people will say, and it is written in history books that, most black landowners, they were literate. Well, my grandfather was illiterate, and he left sharecropping and started working on the railroad and owned his house, the land that it was built on, and another piece of property. And so here is somebody who is illiterate. Now, if you know from the census that he is illiterate, and that's what a historian's going to look at. But then I happen to have in my possession the actual real estate, the purchase documents of that. And then I have his X on it, because that's all he could sign with was an X. So here's what I want, and there are lots of other stories like this that I'm going to tell tonight, but history and memory can go together in a very real way, and we can learn so much more about people. People carry around an oral history. Everybody carries around their own oral history, and that's what I particularly as a trained historian, want people to know that, first of all, they carry their own history. They can tell it to somebody. And in the hands of a trained historian like myself, who can put some context to it, we can create archives for people who, for whatever reason, have been left out of the quote-unquote official archives.
We're speaking with Dr. Deborah Gray White, who this evening, at the behest of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which still exists at Mount Holyoke.
I didn't know we could say those words.
We can. You just lose your federal funding.
5:30, History versus Memory, the case of Lily Thomas Hines and Eddie Florence Gray.
It's interesting to hear that said about history with firsthand accounts, because so much of what we know comes from those accounts. That whole project from the New Deal, like talking with old slaves to find out what it was like. And those documents are like, those are all firsthand accounts, like written by somebody else, but like firsthand accounts. And it's an important point of cultural memory to have that. But I'm curious if your work with those archives and talking about your mother and your grandmother influenced you moving to writing a memoir.
You know, I worked in those WPA narratives, that the ones that you're talking about, and there are volumes and volumes and volumes of these, and they are in some ways the only, aside from the narratives that are written at that time. After slavery, particularly right after the Civil War, particularly when you have Freedmen's Bureau records, you begin to get more documents. But these are really first-hand documents, and when I wrote my first book, Aren't I a Woman?, Female Slaves in the Plantation South, at that time, and even today, there are many historians who discount those documents and who discount those memories as not real historical sources. And they question them because they say, well, you know, they were done by people in the 1930s, and so they were only children during slavery, so they couldn't possibly have remembered all of the things they will remember. Then there are others who will say, well, you know, they're just going to be remembering slavery the way, you know, somebody else told them it was, or they're just going to make, you know, they're just remembering it so that white people look bad. And you know, there were really some really nice and generous white slave owners who tried to do everything for their slaves. So we really can't take these enslaved persons, their account of things, because they have a biased memory, and on and on and on. And for the very longest time, and even today, there are many professional historians who will not use the WPA narratives because they say they are too biased. One of the things that I want to talk about is, all right, if you're not going to use those WPA narratives to find out from the enslaved what their point of view was, then what are you going to use? Because essentially the only other records that you have are going to be those records that were written by white people who were their enslavers and who also prevented them from reading and writing the kinds of sources that are accepted as legitimate. My first book relied very heavily on those. It does speak, however, to the issue of the archive and what archives are perceived as legitimate and what archives are perceived as illegitimate. My feeling, though, as a trained historian, and you know, I don't necessarily know that you must be trained, but I can take some documents, add my memory to it. There's nothing that I will say about my mother and my grandmother that I don't have some kind of documents for. And trust me, going back to the fire, I can tell you that fire totally impacted and also the loss of a child. You do have some Southerners, white Southerners, enslavers, who said, you know, black people really they don't really have the same kind of feelings as we have. I can tell you that my grandmother felt. She had also two stillborn children who, as far as the government is concerned, did not exist. Why? Because there are no documents. They didn't get birth certificates and then no, the child was stillborn. They buried the child right then and there. It's in the family Bible. Both of those children carry names of relatives, both paternal and maternal relatives to their graves that the government did not record. So I go back to, what first of all, what's in archive? That's a long way to get around to get to the question of why I'm doing this memoir. I live. My mother and grandmother both deceased, but they lived. They deserve an archive. They made history. They can tell us an awful lot about what Black women felt, what they did in their lives. And I know I can talk about Lily Thomas Hines and Eddie Florence Gray from a very personal point of view. Now, if you're going to tell me that my memory, that I'm being inaccurate and you want a much more accurate, quote unquote, legitimate history, well, this is history. And I think that all of those people who are now doing their own personal genealogy and who are writing these things down and who are finding people, that the history that they're finding out, they can write it down, put it in an archive, and save it so that generations 100 years from now can discover it.
Through your work with archival material, do you have advice or opinion on the ways that people document their lives now for further preservation?
I think that, we used to look towards letters, and we used to look towards things that are written. Now I think, in the last few years, we've started looking at art as a historical document. We've actually begun to see, music and lyrics so I think that's going to continue to expand. I shudder to think what's going to happen to all of the emails that have our feelings in them. I do think, though, that I'm going to have to collect people's hard drives, maybe. But I think that this new generation, that they will figure that one out. I'll leave it to them.
Tomorrow, Dr. Deborah Gray White, you're having a roundtable discussion, and one of the topics that you'll be talking about at UMass is the challenge and future direction of African American studies, Africana studies, and Black women's historiography. I'm starting to perceive from how you're talking about this some of the trials and tribulations that you may experience going forward in that, plus the fact that we jokingly said DEI is something that we're not allowed to talk about anymore. What do you foresee going forward as a historian for future historians when it comes to African American studies?
Well, let me just say that one of the things that us historians say is, the past is prologue. This struggle that we have had is just now, a much more, let's say, visible form of what we have gone through particularly for the last 50 years, and particularly since I've been in the profession. It now has just come from underneath the covers. We have been fighting this since we were fighting gatekeepers. If you look at the number of Black professionals, professional historians and people who just do African American studies. It's not like people all of a sudden after the Civil Rights Movement decided, oh, well, we're going to write Black history. Black people, ever since Carter G. Woodson, ever since W.E.B. Du Bois, have been struggling to put this history before the American nation. So, to be honest, this is just another phase of the same old story. And it's not like all of a sudden, they're a lot more effective. But my feeling is that we prevailed in terms of surviving. The problem is maybe we survived too well. The problem is that we actually overcame all of the obstacles put in our way. And my feeling is that there are a whole lot more of us. When I started, there were just a few, and who survived, because many who started the journey of trying to get a PhD and to write Black history did not survive. They got to them. but many of us did. And my feeling is that there are too many of us now who are going to be doing this, and we're going to keep on doing it. And we're going to have, to me, there is no telling where this story can go. Who knew that when I started writing in 1973, when I started researching, that there is not a book, not one book on female slaves. Not one. In fact, Aren't I a Woman, my first book, it got to the Library of Congress. And when it got to the Library of Congress, they didn't have a place for it. So they held an editorial meeting in 1985, and they created a whole card catalog subject for women slaves. Who knew that, I certainly didn't, that 50 years later, we're now getting people who are writing about black women's fashion and who are going back to the 1920s and to the turn of the century to actually analyze and tell us what people were thinking and wearing. My grandmother would never, ever have thought that her name would have made it into a history book. We are going to prevail because we're going to stay in the struggle.
It's truly an honor to meet you. We were, before we began, saying that you are a pioneer of sorts in this field. And, we are celebrating Black History Month. We on the show talk about Black history all the time, and history in general, and Black futurism and all of this sort of thing. But somebody had to get the ball rolling, and you were one of those somebodies. And I think the 5 colleges who brought you here for this week, we're really lucky to have you within our midst. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for caring so much about Black history. And it's shows like this that's going to keep Black history alive.
And in a PBS tie-in, if you're unable to see her speak at Mount Holyoke or UMass campus, you can see one of the first filmed appearances from her as part of the classic series Africans in America on PBS Passport.
So cool. She's awesome. Now to hear the unlikely but atmospheric combination of kora and accordion with Ablaye Sissoko and Cyril Broto, who will perform at Bombyx Center for the Arts and Equity in Florence tonight.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar in Hatfield, offering personalized solar energy solutions and ongoing customer care, proudly serving communities throughout the Pioneer Valley. Northeast-solar.com.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. Tonight, a meeting of instruments and worlds will happen at Bombyx Center for Arts and Equity in Florence.
Ablaye Sissoko and Cyril Broto's collaborative project embodies 2 histories, 2 cultures, 2 horizons, and 2 landscapes. Ablaye Sissoko from Senegal practiced the kora 10 hours a day for 15 years. After that, he stopped playing until he turned 40, the age he assumed the griot's responsibilities, including that of music.
Creative and curious, Cyril Broto has been traveling the roads for more than 20 years. He hosts concerts, balls, and master classes in his native France and all over Europe. His participation in numerous groups through encounters and his own interests led him to broaden his repertoire and explore both traditional music and hip-hop.
Together, they bridge sound and tradition with something that becomes far more than its parts, and tonight they'll perform in Florence at a sold-out show at Bombyx Center for Arts and Equity. Welcome Ablaye Sissoko, Cyril Broto, and their road manager, Francois Bloch, who's kindly acting as our translator because neither Monty or I speak very good French.
Un peu. Let's hear a song.
Santa Fanuta Kunulu bebeti Ibitalame Ibebita Ibebita Santa Keldame Ibebita Ibebita Santa Keldame Simala Kirida Salaya Malaya Sima Kirida Salaya Kunulu bebeti Ibitalame Ibebita Ibebita Santa Kirdame Kuno kunole Kunota Kuno kunole Kunota Kuno kunole Kunota Kuno kunole Kunota Kuno kunole Kunota
Oh,
Amazing.
so
Ablai
pretty.
Sissoko and Cyril Broto, who are playing a sold-out show at Bombix in Florence tonight. And we've got their road manager, Francois, to translate from English to French, which has become his former lingua franca. So we'll use it now.
How did they meet? How did you two meet? Like, how did you start working together?
Bonjour à tous, d'abord. L'histoire est un peu longue, je vais essayer de faire un peu court. Quand on s'est rencontré avec ma chérie, elle m'a fait découvrir la musique d'Ablai. Elle est fan de la musique d'Ablai. Quand on s'est installé ensemble dans notre maison dans le sud-ouest de la France, on a commencé à organiser quelques petits concerts dans la maison, dans le salon, où tu enlèves le canapé, tu accueilles un ou deux musiciens de passage pour une quarantaine de personnes dans le salon, et c'est super.
Continue, je vais après.
Et un jour, je me suis dit, tiens, comme elle est fan de la musique d'Ablai, pourquoi pas inviter Ablai à jouer un concert privé pour une trentaine, une quarantaine de personnes dans notre salon. Ce que j'ai fait via l'intermédiaire de François, et nous avons eu le bonheur que Ablai vienne faire un concert pour nous et une trentaine de personnes, dans notre salon, chez nous. Et l'histoire a commencé comme ça.
So everything starts from Cyril's wife, who is a long-time fan of Ablai's music, okay? And before they even met, okay, together. And when they relocate together, Cyril and his wife, his wife started to play the Ablai's music. So Cyril is just, wow, who is this guy, this griot from Senegal, I like it. And they started to, they used to do some like private concert, home concert, and say, that would be a great surprise for my wife if I succeed in bringing Ablai home for his private concert. So actually, he wrote to me because I'm Ablai's manager, and I say, hey, I knew Cyril's work, so I could vouch for him. Okay, say, hey, I'm Cyril, I play accordion. My wife is fan of Ablai's work, and okay, maybe an out of line here, but I would love Ablai to come and perform for me and our 30 guest musicians now for home concert. And yeah, Ablai say yes. Tu avais dit oui, hein, Ablai?
Ablai obliged.
So, and Cyril said that the whole journey started like this, like from just like random like request. It just, like yeah.
Like
Oui,
serendipity.
je veux juste rajouter, c'est aussi dans la tradition des griots aussi, que d'aller chez les gens, jouer chez eux aussi, pour la famille et pour tout le monde aussi.
Yeah, Ablai is right. Ablai just said that part of the griot tradition is like it's part of this tradition to go to people's places and house and play for these people. It's like forwarding the stories and stuff. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And bring them to the people. Wicked cool.
Yes. This is an unlikely combo of accordion and kora, but it seems to work so perfectly. How did you know it would work together enough that you would make recordings?
Il dit qu'en fait c'est une combinaison qui n'est pas habituelle de kora et accordéon. Et comment vous saviez que ça allait marcher? Qu'est-ce qui fait que ça marche aussi?
Moi, je peux commencer par répondre simplement d'un point de vue technique et analytique de la chose et organologique de la chose. Après, peut-être Ablai pourra en parler d'autre chose. Si on prend la kora, c'est une corde pincée, donc quand tu attaques la corde, si tu regardes l'enveloppe du son, il y a une attaque et il n'y a pas de sustain. Donc voilà, ça fait tec, 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 tec. Ok, super. Et moi, l'accordéon, c'est un son où il n'y a pas tec, 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 puisque j'ai pas d'attaque. Moi, ça fait...
You got it?
Mostly, but a lot of it had to do with hand gestures.
Et si dans l'organologie, techniquement, tu combines les deux, tu te dis, c'est obligé que ça fonctionne. Il y en a un qui a de l'attaque et il y a l'autre qui a de la tenue. Et si tu mélanges bien les deux, ça va bien se marier. Ça, pour moi, c'est mon point de vue. C'est une théorie d'un point de vue technique. Ça qui ne vaut que pour moi.
Tu veux ton avis, puis je traduis la sauce.
Oui, moi je pense c'est vrai, c'est deux univers différents, au fait, deux traditions différentes, mais dans le même univers, comme on dit. Je pense qu'aussi, derrière les instruments, il y a les hommes aussi. Il y en a un accordéoniste, un choriste qui peut se rencontrer, peut-être ça ne marcherait pas. Mais voilà, il y a des moments, c'est un coup de foudre, hein, tu sais, c'est comme l'amour. On ne décide pas, il y a deux gens qui se rencontrent et puis le feeling est là. Donc c'est comme si on était fait pour être rencontrés. Voilà, et derrière les hommes, c'est vrai, il y a les instruments. Devant les hommes, il y a les instruments, mais derrière les instruments, il y a les hommes. Et il y a aussi, quelle est l'histoire qu'on veut partager ensemble?
You have to summarize that quickly, François,
Yeah,
so we can hear more music before the end of the show.
Yeah, I will summarize. So, Cyril, he has more the technical point of view, and it's about, he said you have like a string instrument, you pinch the string, so it's like short sound, like a strike, I don't know.
Yes,
and
big
the accordion
staccato,
is
yeah.
more like something like sustain more,
Right.
and it means both instruments are complementary. Okay, and Ablai says, okay, you all bring the instrument stuff, but he say, maybe we should bring the personal stuff, the people stuff. Now,
Yeah.
before instrument, it's the person. And maybe it works great because it's Cyril and Ablai. And maybe not only because accordion and kora.
Aha,
I
it's
think
the
that's
people.
right.
I love it.
Yeah, and watching you two play, that's absolutely true.
Well,
Like,
let's just tell everybody quickly that tomorrow on the show, the Amherst College Zumbis will be here to do a cappella music for Live Music Friday before the Silver Chord Bowl on Sunday.
and then we'll head to the only store in Leverett to taste wine and talk birds with second level sommelier.
And we'll go to Holyoke Community College and examine what the radical future of the Valley might look like post-capitalism. We will leave you with more music from tonight at Bombyx. It's sold out, but you get it live for free right now. Ablai Sissoko and Cyril Broto. Thank you so much.
Signola, signola, signola. better model. Signora, 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 better model. Tero kilomani, tero sankomani, alinya nyofu, tero, tero. Tero kilomani, mañana saca la maluca. Tero, tero, mañana kibir la maluca ma. Signora lomo, beto lomo. Indiamo solo, mi ne fatevi son cola. Ni son solo, ni me fatevi che le la. Sila che sala. Tero sankomani, alinya nyamfu. Tero, tero.
Merci beaucoup.